I want to welcome to the broadcast a good friend of the Line of Fire, Laurie Higgins, who serves as a cultural analyst with the Illinois Family Institute. And Laurie, well, before we get into it, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, in a moment, I do want to talk to you about what's going to happen on the Day of Silence in a little over a week. But it just struck me that the name for this gay activist protest day at the schools is becoming increasingly ironic in light of what's happening in society. What just happened with a mutual friend of ours in Canada?
Well, Pete Labarbera, who's the president of Americans for Truth about homosexuality, was invited to speak in Saskatchewan to a pro-life organization. He was going to talk about the connection between the pro-abortion movement and the pro-homosexual movement. And he got in late last night and was detained by the authorities there. I think they searched his luggage and his computer and his phone. And then he was allowed to leave for the evening until he had to return today at noon for a hearing to appeal his barring from Canada. They're trying to kick him out of the country or not let him enter.
Now, how in the world did this happen? Peter is a respected journalist, and in recent years, he's devoted time to his website, Americans for Truth about homosexuality, which is just putting out the truth about these things, whether it's the latest government reports on health risks for homosexual practice or something that happened in the school system or some silencing of critics of homosexuality. How did he get banned from entering Canada?
Well, homosexual activists were very angry that he was coming into the country, and they organized a protest, and they have really repressive hate speech laws in Canada. In fact, I was just reading about them just now, and in Saskatchewan, you can be fined, up to $10,000 for saying something that injures, and this is a quote, the feeling, dignity, or self-respect of someone else. So it's going to come to this in the United States if we remain silent on these issues. They simply want to shut down, if they can't eradicate conservative moral beliefs, they want to make it impossible politically and socially to express them.
All right, so just to understand then, if, say, a homosexual activist got up publicly and demeaned a Christian and said that their beliefs were primitive and that the Bible was outdated and full of myths and that these people were small-minded bigots who deserved to go back to the Stone Age, that person would also be silenced and perhaps banned from entering Canada. Is that your take?
I think that would be unbelievable if that were to happen. I wrote an article about this incident today and asked the question if Dan Savage, he's the well-known venomous and obscene homosexual activist here in America who got invited to the White House and campaigns while he's calling names of Christians. It has an anti-bullying campaign called It Gets Better. And I wonder if he would be banned from Canada. I would doubt it.
Yeah, and obviously my question was meant to be ironic and sarcastic. So against that backdrop, and I'll probably write on what's happened with Pete as well. We know, for example, for years that Focus on the Family, especially when Dr. Dobson was leading it, when they would do a broadcast in America dealing with homosexuality, they'd have to edit it or air a different one for Canada. As I've spoken in Canada, I was shocked to see that copies of my book, Queer Thing Happened to America, are in libraries there or made it in when I shipped them in to speak. I was shocked to see that because of the amount of repressiveness that there can be with free speech there when it could potentially offend someone that identifies as gay or lesbian. But there is something called the Day of Silence in the schools. You were involved in the Chicago school system for many years, Greater Chicago school system. And there's been a gay activist campaign for years now called the Day of Silence that speaks out against the alleged silencing of gay and lesbian-identified kids in the schools. And kids are encouraged to come to school and be silent that day in solidarity. Of course, the silencing is going the exact opposite way these years. But when is it happening, and what would you encourage Christian parents to do?
Well, it's happening actually today. It's the 11th in most schools, and years ago some schools used to change them relative to other school activities, but most schools are having it today. The schools try to say that this is organized by students. It is organized by students, in schools, but it's sponsored by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. And its central goal is not to end bullying. All decent people oppose the bullying of students for every reason. The central goal is to eradicate conservative moral beliefs, to marginalize people who hold them. That's what the homosexual movement is trying to do with Pete, call him names and call him hateful and try to marginalize him from the Christian community. And that's what they try to do in public schools. And it's in thousands of public schools in the United States, and it's in increasing numbers of middle schools. I wouldn't be surprised in another couple of years. Actually, I did read about that it was in 1/5 grade last year. I don't know if that's
Wow.
true. I read about that on the school's website, so I assume it's true. So we're encouraging parents to call their schools, ask a very specific question, which is, do you allow students to refuse to speak during instructional time, during classes, on the day of silence? And if they do, parents should keep their kids home. Schools do not care about the views of conservative parents. They don't care if parents believe it's disruptive. I've been trying to tell people that high school students today are struggling with a whole host of issues that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, they wouldn't have struggled with. Kids are cutting, they're using drugs in a much greater extent, including heroin. They've got alcohol issues, they've got family dysfunction, broken families struggling with financial issues, academic issues. And then we say, when you come to school, you are going to be confronted in your classes where you're captive with the single most divisive, controversial issue in America. That is not a compassionate thing to do to kids. Most adults, if they're in social contexts, avoid these kinds of conversations, and we force them on teens in public schools. So keep your kids home for the day. It costs schools money, which is going to speak to administrations more than it is you expressing your views. And by the way, schools are starting to turn around. I've gotten emails this year. One school sent out an email and said, students are allowed to refuse to speak during passing periods and free periods, but not during class.
Got it. And by the way, I had this down on my calendar for one day and then received a notice to make sure I announced it on the 19th, which confused me. Someone had a wrong date, which is why I asked you the wrong question about what's coming. But parents, make sure you talk to your kids today when they get home from school. Ask what happened. And if, in fact, the school participated in this and it was something done officially by the school, I encourage every parent respectfully to go to the school board or to go to the principal administrator and say, how are you sponsoring this? How can you be doing this as a school? And if you go to the website of the Illinois Family Institute, you'll find a lot of very, very helpful information. So go to illinoisfamily.org. You can also read Laurie's great articles there on a regular basis. Hey, thanks for joining us, and let's rejoice with Pete in the midst of the trial and see how God turns this around for the good.
Thanks again, Michael.